Get started. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and I want to ask everyone to stand, and I'll lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you all enjoyed the food. It is a diversity of food, yes. So the restaurants tonight that are providing this food come from Fairfield and Suisun. Logistically, we thought that would be the easiest, but we did want to represent the diversity. And speaking of diversity, Solano County is one of the most diverse counties in the state of California, and Vallejo, I think, being the most diverse city probably in the nation. So if we could thank the folks that provided the food tonight again, and I think there should be a slide of them up there. If you have the opportunity to be in Fairfield, Suisun, please go join them at their restaurants. The other group I'd like to thank tonight are the Suisun Firefighters Association. These brave men and women have provided the no-host bar, and everything they raise from there goes to help their causes. So thank them also. I think the other group we need to thank is the transit operators. How many rode the bus or the transit system today? I thought that was a really neat way of getting here. I didn't do it because I was in Fairfield, but it really begins to show us the complexity and the system that we have in place, which is really important, and that's why we're here. How does housing and transportation work? So this is the period in public comments. I do have 3 speaker cards. Mr. Gwynn? Oh, 4 speaker cards. Mr. Gwynn, George?
Good evening. Thanks for having at least 2 minutes. It'd be nice if it was 3, but...
I'll give you 3.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
1, 2, 3. There we go.
I really hope that you guys make some changes from the way things are going because...
George, speak into the mic. We can barely hear you.
Okay. I really hope that some changes are made because the voters said 70% in each of the 7 cities. Well, I shouldn't say 70 exactly. It was, say 2/3 for everyone. But there were some that were over 70% that said no to RM3. And yet we're stuck. And to make matters worse, there's more money that's going to be going down to Silicon Valley than there's coming up to us. And people in Silicon Valley are a lot better able to pay the bills than we are. It's really not a fair situation. Plus also the composition of the board is stacked because there are more people in Silicon Valley than there are here that are on the board because it's based on population. So it's really not a fair situation for us at all. And the question is what's going to happen to change that? Also, this CASA plan is not a good plan. There's plenty of housing in Dayton, Ohio, and also Detroit, Michigan. There's a shortage of housing here, but the thing of it is it's very inefficient to build more housing here and jam people up here even more than they already are. Plus, also, we're at a disadvantage because the house prices here are dirt cheap compared to Silicon Valley. A house that cost $15,000 in Palo Alto in the 50s is now worth $2 or $3 million. And there's no way that you're going to make something like that affordable for everybody. It's just not practical. So I think there's other solutions that need to be arrived at because keep doing bad results and you get even worse results. So anything that can be changed to make things better is a lot better than the present plans. That's my thoughts on the matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. The other speaker, or next speaker is Mike Zis. Did I say that right? Zeiss?
So 3 minutes is okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Mike Zeiss, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Solano County Orderly Growth Committee. We support the broad outlines of the CASA Compact. but want to ensure that implementation preserves open space. Since 1984, the Orderly Growth Committee has worked to protect open space in Solano County. We support hiking and other public access to protected public land, and we support policies that keep local agriculture profitable. And you too, guys. We also support the broad outlines of the CASA Compact. We recognize that housing and open space are both human needs. And we believe that the CASA Compact can enhance both housing and open space by following the guiding principle of the Solano County General Plan. That principle is that most growth should occur within existing municipal boundaries. And I was really happy to see in the handout there's a very nice summary of the Orderly Growth Initiative. Thank you for that. The Orderly Growth Committee will be working with our elected officials to ensure that the implementing regulations for CASA Compact include the following 3 points. Number one, most new housing should be infill within existing municipal boundaries. Avoid greenbelt areas that protect air and water quality and that help protect housing from fire and other natural disasters. Point number two for the legislation that'll have to follow the CASA Compact. Preserve local review of compliance with CEQA. Public review and local control should not be eliminated or drastically reduced. We get it, housing's a regional problem, it's going to take regional solutions, but local review of CEQA requirements is essential to ensure that new housing is environmentally sustainable. Okay, third and final point for future implementing legislation. Carefully define public land to protect open space. CASA element number 8 is entitled Unlock Public Land for Affordable Housing. Sounds good, but maybe a little scary. If public land means a vacant lot that's right next to an Amtrak station, sure, unlock it by all means. But the definition of public land should explicitly not include agricultural land and should not include environmentally sensitive areas such as parks, wetlands, watersheds, and essential wildlife habitat. So in summary, the Orderly Growth Committee believes the CASA Compact, if properly implemented, can enhance both housing and open space. We call on our elected officials to concentrate new housing within existing municipal boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I think all of us would agree that those guiding principles when it comes to orderly growth are something that we all look forward to, and that's really what's created the quality of life here in Solano County. The next speaker is Joseph Green Heffron.
Thank you. My name is Joe Green Heffern. I live in the city of Fairfield, and I'm also here on behalf of the Solano County Orderly Growth Committee. As Mike indicated, Orderly Growth has worked since 1984 to blend the special blend of urban and rural features that make Solano County a unique place to live in the Bay Area. Orderly Growth envisions a county with growth focused in the 7 distinct cities separated by green rural land. Rural areas should be dominated by thriving agricultural uses and protection of our unique natural features. To help preserve this rural-urban blend of land use, we have worked in the past and will continue to work with the county, local cities, and other partners such as the Solano Land Trust and the Greenbelt Alliance. We understand the need for growth in affordable housing, not only in Solano County, but also across the Bay Area. We are supportive of the proposed CASA Compact as a framework to help fulfill this need. However, implementation of affordable new housing in Solano County under the compact should be met through development within municipal boundaries while continuing to protect the agricultural land and environmentally sensitive areas that Mike mentioned. We also believe that public review and local control will continue to be important and should not be eliminated or drastically reduced in the implementing legislation. Urgency in addressing the shortage of affordable housing need not compromise wise long-term land use policy. New housing that is jump-started under the CASA Compact should be focused in currently established priority development areas or other appropriate infill opportunities identified by the specific cities. There are, however, PDAs where housing is not designated or appropriate and should not be permitted. The longstanding county policy of what is urban shall be municipal, as documented in the existing county general plan and the orderly growth policy, should guide CASA implementation efforts for more affordable housing in Solano County. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Jason Beasy.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jason Bezes. I'm here on behalf of the Bay Area Transportation Working Group, which is an organization based in the 9 Bay Area counties that's trying to increase public transit options as a part of development. And just our day-to-day lives in the Bay Area. I'm here to speak in part of some of my concerns and Batwig's concerns about MTC. Many of you know that there was a 70% no vote last June on Regional Measure 3. That was a vote of no confidence, a resounding vote of no confidence by the people of Solano County in the direction of MTC. And I mean, they were revolting in part the fact that 2% of the tolls in the Bay Area paid in Santa Clara County, but 12% of the benefits went to Santa Clara County. So the people here in Solano County know that they're subsidizing Silicon Valley. And MTC is also the organization that brought us the east span of the Bay Bridge, which is billions of dollars over budget. And so that's another concern. And the concern about CASA, which is also being led by MTC and also many of the corporate real estate interests that are pushing it. There's a lot of concern there with the rent control that would oppose, the eminent domain, that to take parcels to assist with some of these real estate developments, and also the loss of local control. So you've just heard moments ago some of the other speakers saying. So, and so there's concern too that if the Metropolitan Transportation Commission is not handling transportation right, how will it handle housing right? And whether this is the right step to be taking. And there should also be concerns here and there are also concerns about CASA here. We already saw at the ABAG meeting in January where 2 of Solano County's representatives, Supervisor Monica Brown and also Mayor of Dixon, Tom Bogue, courageously voted no on that. So there is concern, a hotbed of concern here about CASA. You have also with MTC, you have someone who's kind of a czar already. The East Bay Times criticized the current executive director as acting like a transportation czar. This is top-down, loss of local control, and also here in Solano County, there is an MTC commissioner you've had for 32 years, and the process that happens every 4 years of selecting the commissioner was troubled by different things. Like on November 2nd, there were lame duck people who voted in the back room of an Italian restaurant to put him there for another 4 years, and then there was a revolt on that. That was not following the law of having 3 people, so they met again in a hotel, and that time it was the 2 people who were the sham nominees, I believe, against him. The mayor of Fairfield and the mayor also of Vallejo were the people who moved and seconded his nomination for another 4 years. And so if the people of Solano County should have been involved in that process, especially when 70% of the people voted no on the course of MTC. And I do believe there's too much of a top-down here, and Batwig's concern is that with the housing, that the voices of the people of Solano County need to be heard. And I need to say, too, that when Chair Hannigan, when this was brought before the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Sparing's reappointment, she was flat out incorrect. She said there that the people of Vallejo and Benicia voted yes on Regional Measure 3, but rural Republican Solano was the only place that voted no. But in fact, 68% of the people of Vallejo voted no, and 75% of the people of Benicia voted no. So the people need to be heard here. And the one last thing I will say,
one last
thing I will say is it says here the purpose of the summit is to inform Solano County's elected officials on housing production policies, et cetera. The people need to be involved too.
The people are involved. That's why it was opened up to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Eric Watkins. Eric.
Thank you. My name is Eric Watkins. I've been a resident of Fairfield for 25 years. I have a wife and 3 kids. I work for Solano County Health and Social Services, so I help service a lot of your the people that are under your purview. We need affordable housing badly. The people that qualify for affordable housing are your own city and county employees, school teachers, and various other things. There needs to be an economic development portion to this plan, because without actual growth within the city, you're going to force us to move out and be pushed out by Silicon Valley, as has been mentioned. It's happened for the last 30 years. We've been a retirement county for, a commuter county for the last 50, 60 years. I've been alive for 40 of those years. In part, we need to change the way we do our housing. We need to move away from suburban sprawl. We need to focus on infill and missing middle housing, which includes apartments, townhomes, and the various other things that we don't have enough of. We seem to have enough of single-family dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. The last speaker is Ms. Jones. That being the last speaker, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Good
after she's
evening,
done.
everyone. I'm not here to testify about statistics or research, but I am speaking from my own experience, and I have a very serious question. I would like to know where homeless people, especially veterans like me, can go just for one night, even if it's not a straight 24 hours, for a safe place to sleep, let alone a shower, without being harassed or being put in jail because I'm homeless. I would really, truly appreciate an answer from you or whoever can give me that answer. I'm tired of being put in jail just because I happen to be homeless. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm now going to turn it over to both Daryl and Brigetta to finish the rest of this program. Brigetta? Daryl?
So welcome. This, we hope, is the beginning of a conversation about where we collectively want to go as a county, 7 cities, and the communities around the conversation of housing. You're going to hear today from state, regional, and local representatives. I'm going to talk a little bit about what work is going on. The purpose of our meeting today is to start that conversation. Your hosts are the City County Coordinating Council, and many of you may not know what that is. It was formed in 1991. Its history is it's made up of 7 mayors and 5 board members who come together, well, sometimes annually, sometimes monthly, depends upon the subjects we're working on, to have a conversation about how we work collectively together to address a variety of challenges that we may face. The most recent purpose statement is included in your packet. We've provided you a lot of information in your packet, and we'll go through what all is in there. But the 4 Cs gets updates on regional efforts from the Transportation Authority, the local agency on Local Formation Commission, the Water Agency, and the county staff, the planning directors, the city managers. And we cover a variety of topics. Housing happens to be one that is in the forefront at this point in time. So the City County Coordinating Council is not necessarily limited to just talking about subjects. We've worked on land use planning, duplication of services and efforts. We've worked on topics around air quality, preservation of the area around Travis Air Force Base. And as I said, right now we're working on a conversation around housing. Go ahead. So these are the members that are currently serving on your City County Coordinating Council. We alternate chair and vice chair. Currently, the chair is Supervisor Vasquez. The vice chair is the Mayor Patterson from Benicia. We alternate because we're trying to keep that balance between the mayors and the board members, and it involves all the others that you see here. And so they are your hosts, although we did work with a work group to help put this together, and you're going to hear from a few of those, Supervisor Brown, Supervisor Vasquez, Mayor Bogue, and Mayor Price were part of the work group that Daryl and I have worked with together. Go ahead. So one of the initiatives, you heard the public already talk about that we're proud of, I think, in Solano County, it serves everyone's purpose, is the Orderly Growth Initiative. It stems from the 1980 general plan of the county. It has had several voter initiatives, and it really talks about growing inside the city limits, growing where municipal services are, and taking advantage of that compact kind of growth to maximize our services and to preserve agriculture and open space. The most recent reaffirmation was when the county updated its general plan in 2008. and it runs until 2028, I believe, in terms of our commitment to working together collaboratively, but focusing, in this case, housing and development inside the cities. Go ahead. So I'm going to talk about one more piece of the Orderly Growth Initiative. You know, it was designed to provide an opportunity for each city to develop its own unique character, to provide open spaces in between, to preserve agriculture, to address flood risks as we're preparing for the potential for floodwaters tonight and tomorrow with the rain, to prevent poorly planned growth and development, and to assure that there was preservation for farms, ranches, watersheds all around us. We all enjoy that today. But it does create some challenges for us, as you're going to hear when we talk about housing and when we talk about how we're part of the 9 Bay Area counties. Every county in the Bay Area grew up a little bit differently. And the challenge for us is to figure out, are we going to be victims of state and regional efforts, or are we going to benefit from our local efforts and turn those challenges into something that we can live with? And we're asking you to get engaged in that conversation as we move forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Daryl. He's going to talk a little bit about his piece of this effort.
Thanks, Brigetta. Well, welcome. Thanks for spending a rainy Monday night with us here. I want to ask a couple quick questions. How many are local elected officials? How many are city staff? City staff? Okay, great. And how many are planning commissioners? So we think that these are 3 key roles in this conversation, because you have policymakers, those that make recommendations to policymakers, and the staff that does a lot of the research, makes recommendations. So we appreciate you guys all being here. We had 2 goals before we started this. First was to try to get a good turnout, get a lot of folks from the community, the elected officials, planning commissioners, city staff that are involved in this issue to come out on a Monday night. So that was goal 1. Thank you for helping us accomplish that goal. Goal 2 is to try to give you a lot of information. That's what Brigetta will go through your packet. There's a lot of good information that the different agencies have put together. And then what else we wanted to do is bring some experts in as well. As Brigetta indicated, think about, why is the transportation guy talking about housing? Well, because we talk about land use at STA. We talk about jobs. We talk about housing. We talk about active communities. We talk about transit, highways, et cetera. So this is not a new conversation for us. Priority development areas were something that if you're a new council member, you may not have heard about it, but it's where we want to focus our future investments. So we have 13 priority development areas. Every city has at least one, several have several. Some of them have done extensive planning and are ready to go. We've also got a lot of investment. We mentioned the Orderly Growth Initiative. We also have priority conservation areas. So thanks to MTC, we have a little bit of money that we work with the county. We're investing in 5 priority conservation areas. So we're doing a lot of land use stewardship, and we're trying to match the transportation with that land use. As you can see there, we've done a lot of investment. A lot of the transit centers that you see are because cities like yourself have decided that transit's important. They're going to build facilities, they're going to provide service. Now what we're focusing on is how do we provide better connections, first, last mile, active transportation, transit connections, so that it's easier to walk there, bike there, take a short Lyft ride and get there versus having to drive down on Interstate 80 to go down to San Francisco or Santa Clara, et cetera. Next slide. There's several reasons why this is emerging, and this is not something new, and I'm sure Steve Heminger will talk about a little bit, but there's been legislation that's really pushing that linkage together, both in terms of providing air quality benefits, sustainability, transportation, and land use, that now there's a requirement at the regional level that those have to be done in concert. They can no longer be done separately. So that's why a lot of these things are emerging. And also there was a recent merger between MTC and ABAG that the guy who now runs both of those is here to talk about. And so again, you've got to focus in the region on land use and transportation. Next slide. So now I'm going to hand it back briefly to Brigetta.
So also included in your packet, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that today from some of our speakers, is information on what is the regional housing needs allocation, which is a legal process that we have to go through. And it starts at the state, actually may start at the federal government, starts at the state. And we are currently in a planning cycle from 2014 to 2022. And it assigns based on the job growth, population growth, housing needs. It assigns to, in this case, it was ABAG previously, the Bay Area Association of Governments. Now it falls under the Metropolitan Transportation Commission with their merger. It assigned to us housing requirements, things that we were to plan for as land use planners, and hopefully we were going to build to address the housing shortfall. It was a needs assessment, so it's based on a shortfall that we had. So if you look at the numbers that are up there, they're defined based on income and based on affordability. And we are one of 3 counties that, when we went through this process a number of years ago, opted to take that number and then collectively between the 7 cities and the county figure out how we were going to share those numbers, as opposed to letting the Bay Area tell us how much each jurisdiction was going to build. That'll be a conversation that we will have to have again in 2021, I believe, as the process for planning for this is starting in 2019. So in the meantime, we're also preparing for the 2020 census. And the cities and the county are collectively working on how are we going to ensure that we get a good count. That census is important not only for our local numbers, but it drives a lot of state and federal funding as well. And so, you know, the census will also inform the Bay Area and the state about the affordability of housing and what is needed. So go ahead. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the packet, and then we're going to get into some of our speakers. So included in your packet, we've provided you a brief history on what the City County Coordinating Council is, to give you some background, how we're organized and structured. I have the role of support staff with some of my staff to convene the meetings, to run the minutes, to keep the agendas, to keep the website, and to encourage through the cooperation between the Transportation Authority, the planners. All your planning directors are part of that support group, as well as the mayors, the city managers, the conversation that happens between the mayors and the board members. Also included in your packet is a brief history on the Orderly Growth Initiative, the 2020 census that is starting. The planning process has already begun. A list of acronyms. Those of you who are not in transportation or planning, you'll notice we have lots of acronyms. I think every discipline has one. We've tried to give you the ones we know come up the most to give you some background. A slide on the regional housing needs allocation, a current list, the best that we could, of the amount of housing, amount of legislation that is in process with regards to housing. A copy of the CASA Compact, which you'll hear about. You've already heard public comment. You're going to get a presentation on what is that, what does that mean, and what are some of those concepts, because it is currently out for conversation and comment. It hasn't been adopted. It's a process. And then we've got a couple of maps on the here we go, acronyms, priority development areas and priority conservation areas, and where they are in Solano County. Now, those were areas that were identified by cities as part of a planning process where they were going to do specific things, and they were shared then with the region through ABAG and MTC. And then the Solano Sub-HIP pilot program, which you'll also hear a little bit about. That's kind of our approach, led by the planners and the transportation people, as to what we might do differently other than what the regional plan says. It's a conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daryl.
Thank you, Brigetta. So really quickly, this is a 3-part presentation. We've invited 6 very bright, very experienced, and very knowledgeable individuals to come and talk about this whole subject. So we're going to introduce somebody from the state, somebody from the region, and then 4 folks on a local panel. You're going to have an opportunity to weigh in. I'm going to talk really quickly about the clickers, which you all have that. If you've been to any of our senior summits, you know what this is about. We're going to ask you some questions to see what you guys know about your county and some of these issues, and you're going to get a chance to answer. So what will happen is a question, one of our local officials, Supervisor Brown, will be first. She'll be asking you 3 questions. She'll ask you the question. You'll see the answer, options for answers. You're going to hit that letter, vote for that thing, and the results will show up. And we'll go through 3 of those questions before we go to our first panelist. So with that, introduce Supervisor Monica Brown.
So good evening, everybody, and yeah, a microphone and a teacher voice always helps. So here's the first question, and I know you can read to yourself, but I'm going to read it out loud. According to the 2010 census, what percentage of Solano County residents live within the 7 cities? So decide, A, B, C, or D. Think about it. Once you've decided, you can't go back. Everybody has a clicker?
Ready, Monica?
Okay. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2. I just assumed. Did you get it? 1. Well, 1 because Skip had to turn it on. I wasn't, I know, but it's so. Okay, so letter C, 96%, 39% of you guys got it right, so that's not bad. Yeah, exactly. All right, question 2. According to the Regional Housing Needs Allocation known as RHNA, how much housing production is Solano County responsible for producing over the next 10 years? Take a minute and look at your choices. Think about it, realizing there's no coming back from your choice. So, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, 42% of you think it's letter B. Let's find out. Whoa. Woo. Okay, so are you guys the ones that I'm going to have you take care of my checkbook, right? Make sure that it all balances. All right, so the third question. How far below the regional average is the price of an average Solano County home? I know. How far below the regional average? So take a moment, think about it. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see. Oh. So, letter C, 54%. Oh. And then they even wrote out that Daryl gets to thank me. You're welcome, Daryl.
Thank you, Supervisor. I can tell your experience in the classroom. There you go. All right, so we're now going to introduce our first presenter. He's going to walk up here real quick. Bill Higgins is the Executive Director of the California Association of Councils of Governments. He joined CalCog as their director in 2011. Prior to that, he actually worked for the League of California Cities, which is an association, of course, of the cities, where he was a senior staff attorney, program manager, legislative representative, and also worked for the Institution of Local Government, where he focused on local and regional planning, housing, economic development, and local land use. So if you didn't know, STA is actually a member of CalCog, and we always appreciate Bill's expertise and knowledge and insider information, so that's why he's here.
Thank you, and a great turnout tonight. I came here because I was promised 3 Tupperware full of leftovers to take home. I've been to a lot of these, and this is like the best meal I've ever had, so thank you very much. All right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about housing legislation. I'm going to try and take a step back because I realize a number of you probably don't know exactly what a regional housing needs assessment is and how it works. And so if I'm going too fast, raise your hand, slow down. I'll try and not use acronyms, but I'm really good at using acronyms, so I apologize. So I'm going to start off with the basics, though. all right? And what I like about, I learned about legislation on Saturday morning watching the cartoons. And so when I came to Sacramento, I thought it was going to be just like this. And what I learned is Sacramento is nothing like Washington, D.C. And what I thought I would do is give you my 3-minute primer of, well, maybe it'll take 4, but of the state legislative process. And the biggest difference in our state legislative process to the national one is we are on a strict timeline. Everything's on a schedule. And a number of bills get introduced and from January to May. In fact, last Friday was the bill deadline. And on Friday, does anybody know how many bills got introduced because legislators like to wait till the end? Almost 750 bills got introduced on Friday alone. So between January and May, all of those bills, and I'll get to the numbers in just a second, have to go through a committee process and a House process just in the first House all by itself. That means they have to go through a policy committee, and they look at it. And then most bills have a fiscal impact, so they have to go through the Appropriations Committee, and they have to look at that. And then they have to go on the floor and get voted off the floor, where they go to the second House by May into June. And they go through the process there. And then by August, they go into concurrence, where the first House has to agree to the amendments that the second House did, and then it goes to the governor, and this all happens in 1 year. Now, there are certain constraint points in this time where all your staff is working, and the first is the first policy committees that I just described. Lots of work going right there. And then we have the fiscal committee, just to raise that again. So, and what we're doing as people working in Sacramento, when we're in the policy committee, we'll say things like, this is bad policy because of A, B, and C. But when it goes into the fiscal committee, we say, this costs too much because of X, Y, and Z, right? Because the arguments have to be slightly different. And then we do the same thing in the second House. And then in the third House are the end of session deals that you hear about a lot in the news, although that's gotten a little bit better because now that last session deal has to be in print for 72 hours because you guys all have voted on that as by state initiative because you didn't like the last second deals. And then you have the governor sign. So you're doing all that process through the whole year, and this is what you're doing. We have 2,500 active bills a year, and that's how many make it through the end. And last year, 870 new laws were signed by the governor. And they do that every year. And that's not the only thing you do. You know why? Because right now they're doing a budget process too, over a $100 billion budget process. They started in January. Budget committees are now meeting while they're doing all those policy committees, and then they'll get a budget approved by June 15th. And during this process, they take a 30-day holiday just to make it harder. And notice how everything's laid out there nice and neat. It can all go crazy because they have a rules committee that can suspend rules, change rules, and make it all different. And that's your legislative process in California, so that's my primer. Any questions? All right, that is the simplest I can make it, but if I have, when I tell my executive to work with it, you gotta think about the timelines. It's like one big project management schedule to get to the end, multiplied by 2,500. All right, so this is why what many of our members, and I didn't tell you a little bit about what CalCog is, or the California Association of Councils of Governments. We're a member association of regional governments across the state. So the Solano Transportation Authority is a member. So is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments. There are 47 of those agencies around the state that are members of my organization that I work for. We do conferences, we share information, and we'll get that. A lot of our members have what you have here, which is a statement of legislative principles. This is on their website. It's not in your materials or handouts. But why these legislative principles are a good idea is it helps your staff act fast as legislative deadlines approach. And it's a preset of things that you stand for, so your staff says, yeah, that's consistent with our principles, we'll support that bill. or heck no, that's not what we stand for, we oppose that bill. And so you have your staff, and often your staffs are bringing to the elected officials nuances where it's not entirely clear, but you have these. And I say that that's a good thing to do. So, now let's talk housing. I've given you my legislative primer, and we have a new administration in town, and things are different. And housing is a really big priority. Have y'all heard that this governor really wants and thinks housing is important? And his goal is that we have 3.5 million new homes in the next 7 years. Now, how does that compare to typical? The most our state has ever built in a year is about 210 to 215,000, according to the Building Industry Association. If you multiplied that by 7, that would be about 1.5 million. So his goal is double anything that we have done in the past before, and that's pretty staggering. Now, he has backed it up in his budget with some one-time funds, and we have a lot of bond money that we adopted in the last initiative. So there are billions of dollars about to hit the street to support housing. So that is something that's new and different. Another thing that we've seen from this governor already is a willingness to enforce the laws that are on the books already. Has anybody here from Huntington Beach? Why do I say that? Because they threatened to sue Huntington Beach because they're not in compliance with their housing element. And there are 46 other cities in the same situation around the state. So they are looking to provide a combination of carrots and sticks, incentives and penalties to meet their housing goals. And what I mean by incentives, when you look at their budget, there's $250 million in new planning money that they want to give to cities in order to achieve better planning results. There's an additional $500 million that they want to use as incentives for that. So, and there's all the bond money on top of that, and there is about $300 million for homeless planning on a regional scale. So that is what this governor is trying to do. Use carrots and sticks, but he has definitely made it a priority of his administration. And that is something that is really different than the last administration. Now, I'm going to go to the green down there, which is recent trends. You just took, I know you don't understand what AB 828 plus AB 1771 plus economy equals a high RHNA number, or high regional housing needs number. I'm just going to crystal ball guess. You had 4 choices on that multiple choice about what your county regional housing needs assessment were, and you guys nailed it because you guessed about, it was 6,977. And then you had a guess at 12,000 and a guess at about 15,000. I'm going to guess your next RHNA is somewhere between 12 and 15,000, and here's why. SB 828 that passed last year requires the state, when they assign MTC, or ABAG actually, when they assign ABAG, the big regional number that has to be distributed around all 9 Bay Area counties, they have to consider a lot of factors that they hadn't considered before related to vacancy, overcrowding, and cost-burden houses. And when you dial those factors, the RHNA number is going to get really high. In addition to that, the last time we had a regional housing needs number assigned to us in this region, how was the economy? We were dealing with the housing crisis. Nobody was forecasting an aggressive house build at all. And so that regional housing need number was actually lower than your number 8 years before that. So there's going to be compensation because now we have a really good economy. And I know you're not against a really good economy, but that's going to be a high RHNA factor is a factor of that. So when you count, and AB 1771 is another bill that will ask you to take a look at more fair housing considerations in your RHNA number. When you add those three things together, the housing number that you're going to get, that your cities are going to have to rezone to meet, is going to be, I predict, double that 6,977 number. I'm messenger, don't shoot. I'm just here to warn you of that. In addition to that, we have a new bill that was carried by Senator Wiener a couple years ago called SB 35. And that limits discretion. It's one of many bills, but it's probably the most prominent. That limits discretion if you're not achieving your housing number, so that developers get almost a by right approval process. So for those of you who are in historic areas or areas that you want to kind of preserve some neighborhood feel, that's going to make your life a little bit more difficult. I also, whoops, oh, that's the, oh, I have one of these. I'll just do that for a second. The other trend that's happening here is it used to be to comply with your housing element requirement, the city just had to zone. There had to be zoning on the books for that number. What we're starting to see now in state legislation is a more focus on actual production. Now, this is harder for cities because you don't necessarily control who shows up at your planning counter. On the other hand, some cities, maybe some in the Bay Area, none in Solano County, have been really good at finding a suite of regulations and conditions and design review and fees that make it difficult for development to pencil out. Perhaps you can think of some. So what the state legislature is trying to do is pierce that defense mechanism and get housing built, because we don't have enough housing. Our kids are moving to Oklahoma, and we want them to stay here. I don't know about Oklahoma, it just came to mind. So, another trend. Here's our governor saying, to me, transportation is housing, and housing is transportation. So he's looking at linking these two, and some of you may have heard that he wants to connect the provision of local streets and roads money to housing production. That was an idea that he had floated in his State of the State speech. It has yet to appear in his state budget, but we know that they're talking about it. So linking, because the idea is you get resources from the state when you're achieving your goals. Everybody with me so far? I'm not using too many acronyms. Is it okay if I take a question right now? I've got one.
All right, so are you talking about Senate Bill 1 money would be tied into transportation?
A portion of the... Yes, I know, and I'm sorry, I'm doing that with you, all right? Okay. I worked with the league, and I think that is, he initially said that, and then he hasn't said that so much lately, because a lot of people came up to him and said, you know, they voted. So, all right. So we'll see how he threads that needle. I appreciate the hand raise. My former League of California Cities South appreciates that. So now I want to talk to you about this. This chart represents the number of housing bills introduced in the legislature. I know you thought it was going to be housing production, but this is actually housing legislation production. All right? And in your materials, you have a list of bills already introduced in the legislature. There are 60 bills that we have already identified on our bill tracker. There's probably 80. These are just the 60 I thought were most relevant to our members, our regional members, in my first initial look over the last week when all the new bills were getting introduced. I'm going to give you just a general idea of where I think this year's legislature is going, and I'm going to spot for you some specific bills. I'm going to talk about one in particular, and then I'm going to talk about what you guys can do to talk about your story, and I'll take some questions. These are the major groups that I see. By the way, see that, anybody know what a spot bill is? Yes. Yeah, that's just one of the bills saying, I hope to do something about this. And so a number of the bills at this time are like this, and they don't do anything yet. So, but there are many bills that want to put more teeth in the housing element. There's been a lot of legislation lately that has done that to strengthen the regional housing needs process. And a lot of it, legislators want to do something. They know it's a crisis, they want to do something, and they're looking for an answer for that. More ADUs. We're starting to see for the first time more rent stabilization and tenant protections. That's something that we're seeing more of this year than we've seen in the past years. And you guys will probably talk a little bit of that related to CASA. And then there's always, my favorite bills are always the one, we need more money for this, but they don't identify the source. And those bills are probably not going anywhere. I did want to introduce to you 5 different ideas that I've seen, some good, some less so. But I'm just going to spotlight 5 here to now these are all in their infancy, and all these bills are mapped out for you in the materials that you have, and there are links on the bill tracker and everything. But one is bringing back redevelopment. Now, this governor has decided that he's looking for other solutions besides redevelopment to fund affordable housing. But their legislators still want some redevelopment. There's emergency shelters in the regional transportation plan. By the way, your materials has my association as an opposed unless amended. That's premature. That shouldn't have been printed just yet. But our point of view is not that you shouldn't take a regional approach to homeless shelters, but the actual transportation plan itself, where the models are very general, are probably not the way to do that. This one's a new one, SB 725, which would cap the number of single-family or above moderate units that you can count toward your RHNA, 20% single-family home. The rest would have to be multifamily in some way. Market rate, that'll be interesting. SB 330, Skinner, would basically suspend a lot of local decision-making if you're in a community that has a really high rental rate above median income or has a really low vacancy rate. And then AB 1758 is, going back to your question, the one that would do exactly what you said, condition SB1 funds. So those are just some of the ideas that are out there floating in the legislature. This is the time of year where, and I was asked to kind of present to you some of the things that the legislature is thinking. Why do you need to know this as you're figuring out what you need to do? I think you just need to know it because there's a housing crisis. There's going to be a really, really high housing number that all of your cities, in order to keep 96% of your population in the city boundaries, are going to have to think about that and how they're going to do it. At a time when the climate laws and the greenhouse gas laws and SB 375 that Daryl mentioned is discouraging us from approving more greenfield developments. Greenfield development will be part of the solution, but we're trying to contain, right? So if you see that, that's a stew of kind of a really gnarly problem, right? And that's why I'm here to message you that this is just a really gnarly problem. And that, and one of the things as a regional entity and a representative of regional entities, I'm glad to see you together as a region to solve this problem, because the individual cities acting on their own would have some difficulty, I think, because there would be some, what's good for me, what's good for you. I think that you all need to work together to solve this, and I'm glad to see a full room to that extent. So how is CalCog going to be responding to this? We're looking to work with our members mostly to help build their capacity to help your communities. And I've spent a lot of time. I want to spend one last time on one last bill that nobody really knows about. Does anybody know what Article 34 of our California Constitution says? I bet you don't. Oh, we've got one. Article 34 of our California Constitution said and it was adopted like in 1933, and this is still in our Constitution, says that any city may not approve an affordable housing development without a vote of the people. That is in our Constitution. We have gotten around it by saying that an affordable housing development is one that is more than 50% affordable. And most of the affordable housing documents you see, the developer guarantees to provide 49% of the units as affordable, so it's not deemed as triggering this provision of the Constitution. But this is a product of a time when our communities were being created to exclude. If anybody's read The Color of Law, which is a very eye-opening book, and the opening scene is about the creation of the city of Milpitas. And the reason that Milpitas was founded was to exclude African-American Ford plant workers working in Richmond that were moving down to the new plant in Fremont. And this is the era of Article 34. And Senator Allen from Los Angeles has got, I think, a measure whose time is past due, which is to repeal that provision of our Constitution. I share this with you because this is a gnarly problem, but it's a real problem, and it's a real problem to a lot of people who don't have the means to spend a Monday night here in a community meeting because they're working a second shift. And it is a gnarly problem that we're going to have to figure out, and I think it's a problem that's going to make us all a little bit uncomfortable. And I don't know what the solutions are, and I know that everybody's going to have to give. But that map up there is the redlining map put out by the Federal Housing Administration about what neighborhoods were okay to invest in and which ones were not. So if you want to track bills, we have our bill tracker. The website is on there. You can track the bills that we're tracking. You can also go to the General Assembly site and track any bill you want. But that's on our website, and it's open to everybody to take a look at. Now, I forgot to mention that Supervisor Sperring is also your representative on my board. So rule number 1 in presenting to an association is always put a picture of your board member in your presentation. So my message to you is that you have a Solano County story, right? I hear from Daryl that you guys have housed a lot of the Bay Area for a long time and you want more job centers here. And you need to be able to tell your story. But when you're telling that story, you got to tell it in the context of the state story, because the 121 people in Sacramento, the 80 assembly members, the 40 senators, and the 1 governor who are making policy decisions are looking at it from a statewide framework. And if you just think about it about what's good for Solano and not what's good for the state, you're going to be less effective. So STA is an important voice for you this. I like to tell everybody that, but you're not alone. You also have, these other members are also members of our association, and these are the 47 members across the state that include LA Metro, our Imperial County, our Humboldt County, our Lassen County, and they all have different regional needs. They're different in every way, but they all need the tools to help their communities address this problem. So that is my presentation and primer for you. I'm happy to take a couple questions. I can take 2, he says I have 30 seconds worth of questions. I'm going to Ms. Patterson first.
So thank you so very much for pointing out about the redlining. There was a recent NPR report on a congressional study that was done, and Vallejo was cited as an
Yes.
example of several hundreds of homes that have been financed and 22 for African Americans.
Yes, I know that report, and it was largely based on Richard Rothstein's research, who wrote The Color of Law.
And so,
Yeah.
when we look at legislation, maybe when we think of housing, we don't think about banking, but they need to be at the table and they need to do their job.
Fair point. I saw another question over here. Yes.
So in regard to the 3.5 million homes that the governor wants us to build,
Yes.
and at the best of times, we've done about 1.5 million.
Yes.
We don't have a workforce to actually build 3.5 million unless there's
There are plans in place. I don't know if they're sufficient. We're also, the question is, for those of you in the back of the room, do we have enough workforce availability to build those 3.5 million homes? We will need some training and what that, at the same time, we just put a lot of road money out in the universe as well, and they're also demanding cement and contractors and things like that as well. So we're going to have to that's one of the challenges we're going to have to overcome. I agree with you. I don't have the answer. Right. Okay. So tell that, yeah, and I'm glad you're honing your voice for when you go to Sacramento. That's good. Yes, sir.
So this is probably more for Daryl and Brigetta.
Oh, please.
Yes. Yeah. Sure. When you think of the North Bay, we're one of the 4 counties in the North Bay, and our 4 counties have a whole lot in common in public policy with the city center development. Is there any effort to put these 4 counties together as a regional voice rather than the Solano Growth Committee? You know, we love growth initiatives, but Napa's got almost identical initiatives. Sonoma's got urban growth boundary around every city in Sonoma. So we have very similar policies.
The answer, quick answer is yes. We mentioned priority conservation areas. Actually, Steve was a big supporter of this, and our commissioner. We now get PCA money, just the 4 counties, to a pilot. So the 4 counties actually get a little bit of money every couple of years to do PCA implementation. So that's coming directly from MTC because of that same reason. Oh. So.
I can take one more question, even though they said I reached my max. I'm going to take one more. No? Then thank you, and thank you for the food. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Bill. All right, thank you very much, Bill. So before we introduce our next speaker, Mayor Harry Price from Fairfield is going to come up and ask you your next 3 questions.
So reach for your little clickers, please. Question number 4. Which 3 cities in Solano County are among the most diverse in the Bay Area? A, Vacaville, Benicia, and Vallejo. B, Suisun City, Fairfield, and Vallejo. Suisun City, C, Rio Vista and Dixon. D, Vallejo, Fairfield, and Vacaville. And the countdown begins. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is B, Suisun City, Fairfield, Vallejo. Thank you very much. How'd you do? How many had it? Well, good for you. Question number 5. Which is the oldest house in Solano County? Pina Adobe, Hastings Adobe, the Spearing House, and Jackson Fay Brown House. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is A, Pina Adobe. Well done. Question number 6. What percentage of residents in Solano County are renters? A, 23%, B, 41%, C, 57%, or D, 62%? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is, oh, look at that. B, 41%. Who has a perfect score? Well, good for you. And before we get to our next speaker, we have a little housekeeping to do.
Steve.
Because he was missing in action in November, we did not have an opportunity during our award ceremony to recognize him and to give him a special award for his efforts. The STA received funding for the following priority projects: I-80, 680, State Route 12 interchange, Solano County train stations, westbound truck scale, Jameson Canyon, the reopening of McGarry Road, Solano Express Capital bus stops, priority conservation area, North Bay funding. Steve Heminger, would you come forward, please?
There I am.
And it's with a great deal of appreciation and gratitude that this short timer, he has 4 more days to go, is finally recognized by all of us in Solano County. So, Steve, there is your award. Congratulations, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll tell you, folks, I am in awe of your question answering abilities. I would like to know who the 5% are who think the Sparing home is the oldest house in Solano County. I know he's the oldest commissioner on the board, but I didn't know about the house. Well, you got a bit of an introduction for me from one of the members of the audience who described me as a transportation czar. And I must be a really lousy czar because I'm retiring on Friday. And I don't recall czars ever retiring from anything. Bill referred to this subject as gnarly. I would describe it in a different way. I do know a thing or two after 25 years about transportation. And I'll tell you the obvious, right? We've got lots of transportation problems in our region. But we've got a housing crisis. And to me, that is the big story. And in fact, that crisis is so severe now that it has basically created more transportation problems that we have to cope with. And so what CASA is about, short story, is trying to figure out whether we can come up with a homegrown solution to this problem in the Bay Area. So let me pluck the gizmo out of my pocket. CASA is an attempt, and I think some of you probably have tried this in your own careers, maybe more out of desperation than anything else. When you've got a really tough nut to crack, you try to assemble the smartest people that you know on the subject, maybe people who disagree about the problem, disagree about the solution, but you throw them all in a room and you basically deprive them of food and water for as long as it takes for them to come back out with a solution. That's what CASA was. It took us about 18 months. We involved all the sectors who have something to say about housing. Obviously, local government has a lot to say about housing, but local government doesn't build the houses. The developers build the houses. Well, maybe the developers don't build the houses. It's actually the labor that the contractors hire to build the houses. So you need labor. Well, but they have to run a whole gamut of rules that are sponsored by environmental organizations. So you involve them too. We reached out to anybody who we thought had a stake in the solution and anybody who we thought was remotely responsible for the problem. That's what CASA is. Quite a few people think it's an acronym. It's not. It's the Spanish word for house. It's just as obvious as you would think. And our simple problem in the Bay Area is we need more CASAs. Now, some people need words. Some people react better, understand better pictures. So I've got the problem statement for you in both words and pictures. So try not to look at the picture yet. Just listen to the problem statement. This is from the CASA Compact, which I thank Darrell and his folks for getting into your packet. I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about it, and it always is helpful, I think, to read what people are talking about first. And this is just a couple of sentences from the preamble in the compact. In one of the wealthiest metropolitan areas on the planet, tens of thousands of our fellow citizens are ill-housed or not even housed at all. Many more families are just one missed paycheck away from eviction. While the recent wildfires have underscored the devastating effects of suddenly losing a home, the reality is that too many Bay Area residents face that situation every day. And that really brought it home to me. We all watched those wildfires. Some of you may have done more than watch them. You may have been fighting them or seeing them up close. And what a difference that made in the city of Santa Rosa, for example, which lost 5,000 homes overnight. Obviously, nothing like that happens every day in the Bay Area, but small portions of that happen to lots of people. I'm sure many of your friends, many of your constituents, and it's just unacceptable. and CASA's about trying to find an answer. For those of you who relate to numbers and charts better than words, this is the chart that I think establishes the problem statement, and you have to read it sort of two ways. The vertical axis is the number of jobs and houses. The horizontal axis are the 9 cities, and then those ratios are the amount of jobs that were created versus the number of houses that were built for the last 15 years or so. And so, bottom line, everybody fails. Ideally, you probably want to see about a ratio of 1.5 to 1. And as you can see, no one's even getting close. Solano's not so bad, but it's still not where we need it to be. And look, I know you folks are not looking for fewer jobs, you're looking for more of them. But look at the place where the jobs were created, the 3 peninsula counties, San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara. They are completely out of whack in terms of creating jobs and not building enough houses. Now, there are lots of reasons for that. And I think, you know, one obvious solution is to move some of those jobs to Solano County. I'm sure you wouldn't mind that at all. That's easier said than done, as you well know. But what we're doing is really straining the hell out of the system, right? Because in order to get those folks, if they do live in Solano County or they live in Contra Costa County, to the peninsula, to those jobs, we have to move heaven and earth in terms of our transportation infrastructure. We are spending ourselves silly trying to cope with a phenomenon that's largely caused by a misallocation of jobs and houses around the Bay Area. So that's the problem statement. What we did in this work is organize our thinking around 3 basic principles, and we called them the 3 Ps, just to try to remember them better. One of them is, look, we've got an economic problem here in that we've got an imbalance between supply of housing and demand. How do you deal with that? Well, one clear way is you build more supply. And so producing more housing for residents of all income levels was a clear objective of our work. But it was also true that we thought it was important to preserve the affordable housing that does exist in the Bay Area. And there is some. It's a vanishing species, but there is some. And over time, the market will just make that unaffordable. And so the second idea was to see where we could to be able to preserve the existing affordable housing that's in place. A third one, which often gets left off the table and isn't, I believe, in my view, talked about often enough, and that is to protect the folks who are living in this region, who are in a house, who are in an apartment, but are in danger of being tossed out. And that also is easier said than done. But we believe that is just as important as building the new house for the newcomer, is to protect the existing tenant who is in a neighborhood that's undergoing change, and to make sure that they're just not bearing the full brunt of the displacement that sometimes occurs. So the compact, if you remember your history books, you know, the Pilgrims came across the Atlantic and they got to Massachusetts and they signed a compact about how they would live together. So that's where we came up with the word. The CASA Compact is 10 ideas. And I want to hasten to characterize what these things are and what they are not. This is a proposal to our state legislature in the main. There is virtually nothing that I'm about to tell you that we can do by ourselves. We need permission from Sacramento. And whether that's a series of bills that relate just to the Bay Area or to the whole state is up for grabs. Whether that's a series of bills that last forever, like laws tend to do, or whether they are sunsetted so that they only last for a period of time while we sort of try to break the back of this crisis. You know, Bill mentioned all of the bills that were signed into law last year. What was it, 800 bills? Yeah. I mean, my own view is for every law they pass, they should repeal 2, and then we might actually be in better shape. But let me go through these in some specificity so you know what we're talking about. I would like to tell you just in terms of remembering sort of the structure of what we came up with. The first three are about that protection P. They're about protecting tenants in existing locations. The next 4 through 8 are about trying to increase that supply, as I said earlier. The last 2, 9 and 10, are in a way trying to borrow a trick from transportation, where we have been able, whether through sales taxes or bridge tolls or whatever the case may be, we've been able to pay for a lot of the improvements we need in the Bay Area with our own local money. And the one good thing about that local money is it doesn't disappear down some hole in Sacramento or Washington. It stays right here where we can keep an eye on it. The idea here is, can we borrow that idea from the transportation field and apply it to housing as well, so that the voters are very much involved in that solution. So the first three, and I won't be slow about this, I'll be fairly quick. The first one is a just cause eviction policy. This is intended to be a backstop in the Bay Area for any local initiative, and this is true generally about CASA. Wherever a city has already legislated and said this is what we'd like to do, our view with CASA is fine and dandy. You've done your deal and we're not going to bug you anymore. We're not going to double down on you. You've already staked your claim. In the case of just cause eviction, which is basically just what it sounds like, that when you evict somebody, you got to give them a reason. San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, the 3 large cities, have already moved in and legislated, but many cities have not. And the idea here with this one, as well as the second and third compact element, are to provide sort of a regional baseline or a regional backstop so that these protections are available in every municipality. The second idea is a rent cap. That does not mean rent control. There are quite a few cities in the Bay Area that have that, and that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is some overall cap on the amount that rent can be raised in a given year. Now, given the fact that that's a trade-off, obviously, between the tenant and the landlord, there is a provision in this idea that talks about being allowed to bank the ability to raise rent in years where you don't take the full cap. So again, this is one where we had landlords and we had tenants' rights activists in the same room, and they were hammering this out. And this is what they could live with, which is why we're trying to move it forward. Obviously, nobody got their way entirely. There was a lot of give and take in this process. The third protection idea is some kind of assistance to tenants when they do go through evictions in terms of legal representation and in terms, if possible, of providing them maybe a short-term loan so that they could pay the rent and not have to get evicted at all. So those are the first three, and that's the tenant package. And that's basically trying to mediate the dynamic between renters and landlords. It really isn't about local government in the sense that we're not asking or imposing on local government to do anything that you're not already doing. If you want to move in and legislate in these areas, that's fine. But if you don't, there's really no additional burden imposed on local government. The next several, as I said earlier, were about trying to bring more certainty, try to go faster when we build houses, trying not to spend so much time in red tape, in planning, in hearing after hearing after hearing. So these series of ideas are about trying to figure out whether we can go faster in building housing and therefore trying to build more housing, period. The fourth idea is accessory dwelling units, ADUs. I mean, I grew up calling them granny flats, you know, in-law apartments. There are actually a lot of them in the Bay Area that we're really not supposed to count because they're really not supposed to be there. And some cities have actually gone through and legalized those dwellings. The idea here is not just to do that, but to build a lot more of them. And in fact, there's a place out in Mare Island which is trying to build them by essentially building them in the factory and then shipping them to the home site and erecting them, which is another way to knock down cost and increase speed. So this one, I think, tended to be the one that we fought about the least, and I don't think that means it's the least important. I think there is a high degree of consensus that this is something we ought to do, and it's a way for a lot of landowners, a lot of homeowners to make some money in the bargain as well. The fifth one is the one that probably had the most controversy, and it still does. This currently resides in Sacramento in the form of a bill by Senator Wiener called Senate Bill 50. And this is about zoning near transit. And this is, I think, clearly a place where the interests of local government and the interests of state government are in some tension with each other. Local government obviously wants to be able to decide what uses are made of its land in any area of its jurisdiction. State government, I think, comes with the view, which I don't think is illegitimate, that they have invested quite a bit of money, and with Senate Bill 1, they're going to invest quite a bit more money in building mass transit improvements around our state, whether it's rail or ferry or bus. And they would like to get some use out of that investment. They would like to encourage the maximum number of people to use those new forms of transit, and the best way you can do that is to get more folks living next door. So, one way to look at this one is in terms of a map. And in the document that you have in your packet, I think you've got a map that's a little bit easier to read than what's up on the screen. And what I'll ask you to do is to not pay attention to all the red squiggly lines. That's the subject of maybe a question later on. But to look at the blue and to look at the orange. The orange are high-quality bus areas that are subject to the bill that's in Sacramento, and the blue are rail and ferry stops around the Bay Area. And one thing to notice is that, you know, about half the Bay Area's jurisdictions have a rail or a ferry terminal. Now, in saying that, I can also say that half of them don't. And one thing that we've heard from some critics of CASA is that this is some kind of one-size-fits-all cookie cutter. Well, it's not, because half the cities in the Bay Area don't have a rail station or a ferry boat. So if you don't have one, you don't have to worry about what you zone next to it. But if you do have one, I think you've got to pay more attention. And obviously, we've got some transit-oriented developments in this county that I am very well aware of that are doing just what this law would suggest. Now, there are some cities who would prefer to just get the transit investment and not be engaged in any further conversation about what happens around that investment. I think there are a lot of cities that are willing to have that conversation, and I applaud you for the leadership you've shown in this county in pioneering some of these ideas, whether it's at the Vallejo terminal or whether it's at some of your capital corridor stations or elsewhere. Number 6, whenever you hear the words good government, you probably ought to reach for your wallet, but the idea that we're talking about here is, again, trying to get this process that we have developed over decades and decades to work a little bit better. And as Bill said, I think there are many cities who try to make it easier to get the housing through the pipeline, and I'm afraid there are some cities who just do their dead level best not to. And the idea here is not to influence what the decision ultimately is, but to try to get to that decision more quickly so that we can move on to the next project. If you're going to say no quickly, right? Don't wait 3 years before you say no. The 7th idea is trying to get at this question of the missing middle. And I don't know if you've heard that phrase, but the basic idea is that the Bay Area, in terms of market rate housing and in terms of our regional housing needs process, hasn't been doing that bad of a job lately. We've been building a lot of market rate housing. It's where we get to the lower income levels that we haven't been doing as well. But at those levels, there are a lot of public subsidies available. A few of them were just knocked out by the Congress with the tax reform bill, but quite a few programs still exist at the federal and state level to support the development of lower income housing and make it affordable for a lot of our residents. What's missing between the market rate and the low-income housing is the missing middle housing, the stuff that our firefighters and cops and all the rest of those public servants need to live in. And they're not expensive enough to meet market, but they're too expensive for what we are able to provide to those missing middle constituents. And so this idea is trying to get at that question by offering a series of incentives, in some cases property tax abatement, again, future property tax revenue, not existing, to see whether we can solve that problem. Oop. Another one that I think is not talked about enough, and that is the fact that a lot of you folks who represent cities and counties here, you are landowners. You own public land. And one way, we believe, for local government to be active in this issue is to see whether they have surplus public land that they might be willing to develop for housing purposes. The chart, if you can see it on the right, is the largest public landowners next to transit in the Bay Area, and lo and behold, number one is BART. BART owns almost 250 acres of land around their stations. And what better place to build transit-oriented development than around a BART station? And if BART owns the land itself, maybe they can make some headway. There was in fact a bill that passed last year that will task BART with doing just that, and we think if it's good enough for BART, it ought to be good enough for VTA. My goodness, I see Suisun City on there. Look at that. My point is that, you know, we tend to talk about this issue as this tug-of-war between state and local government over control of the decision-making. And there is that element to this, but I think there are areas where local government could seize its own destiny and could move forward and really make some progress. Oh, so let me get to the money. Here again, the idea is, can we duplicate what we've been successful at in the Bay Area in terms of raising money ourselves for housing? Now, what that means is elections, that means votes, that means in many cases 2/3 voter approval. It's not an easy task. But the idea we've come up with is we believe there's about a $2.5 billion shortfall per year to subsidize the housing construction that we need for both lower and middle income residents. That's a big number. That's every year. Our idea is, can we come up with $1.5 billion of that ourselves, with the rest coming from the federal and state governments? We have come up with a menu. You might call this pick your poison, because there's probably a couple of ideas on this chart that make your blood boil. There may be a couple of others that you don't mind as long as somebody else pays for it. And as you can see, we've sort of arrayed the ideas according to the potential victims, right? Whether it's property owners or developers or employers or local government or taxpayers. The fact is, you don't raise money in the Bay Area or anywhere without raising it from somebody or from some constituency. And these are a series of ideas that we've come up with. It's a menu that we hope the legislature will choose from, and then they will allow some kind of vote to take place here in the Bay Area that would generate the revenue that we would need to deal with the eviction proceedings, to deal with making sure people have legal representation, to deal with the subsidies that we need for middle and lower income residents. Basically, what we think we need is some kind of regional institution to do that, whether it's the existing institutions we have or some combination of them or a new one. That's all up for grabs. The basic idea we have in mind is that if you did have such an entity, and New York City has a very good one in terms of a national model, it would be able to, whatever revenue you would raise, it would be able to finance against that revenue stream and bring those funds forward, and it would be able to provide a lot of technical assistance to local government along the way. We also, in the compact, and I would just mention this in brief, talk about some of the major issues that are driving this process that we really can't deal with just here in the Bay Area. We need to deal with it statewide, and one of the important ones, I think, and especially I think this is true in this county, is trying to get the passage threshold for these special taxes from 2/3 to something like a majority vote, whether it's 55% like we have for schools. Whatever the case might be, it would be a way of trying to give these measures maybe more of a fair shot at the electorate. So we have been on this journey, as I said earlier, for 18 months. And we have finished the first phase, which is developing the ideas. And now we are bringing them into the giant sausage factory in Sacramento. And as Bill showed you, we need a bill for each one of these ideas, and those bills have been introduced. I think they will have varying degrees of controversy. I encourage all of you to get involved in all the bills for which you have an interest. MTC and ABAG are going to be actively involved, so you can work through them. You could work directly. We certainly don't have a monopoly on good ideas through this CASA process, but I think we have given the Bay Area an opportunity to seize control of its own fate. The way I would look at it, I think CASA is a little bit of a lifeboat because the seas are pretty rocky in Sacramento right now. About half the bills that have been introduced are about housing. Some of them good, some of them probably not so good. And I think what you have here is a homegrown product that we think can do some good in our region and that we think is still subject to fashioning and amending as you see fit. Thanks again for your leadership on this subject. The last time I checked, in terms of producing housing, according to your RHNA numbers, you're doing better than anybody else except Napa. And I don't know how you're going to let Napa beat you. So thanks again for your attention.
So real quick, we're going to have time for a couple questions of Steve. In baseball, the seventh inning stretch is when you get a break. Dessert is being handed out, so please grab one and raise your hand when it comes around to you. Mayor Tom Bogue, after we're done with the questions, we'll be talking with your next three questions. All right, so hands up.
Yes, sir. Can you speak up? Having a hard time. I think it's all the paper wrestling that's going on here.
Have some kind of special dispensation from the legislature where they're not required to build affordable housing. Marin County has some special deal that they passed with the legislature where they're not really required to build affordable housing. Is that going to be addressed? Has it been addressed, or are they just getting a pass?
Well, look, I'm not a fan of that bill, but it did become law. And I guess one way of answering it is, and Bill, I think, made an important point that I'd like to reemphasize. Up till now, state policy has largely been about planning for housing, and then it stops, right? But you can't live in a plan. You can only live in a house. So what matters to the homeowner, the renter, is putting a roof over the head, not what some plan said ought to happen. And what we're seeing now, I think, is somewhat of a sea change in Sacramento, where the focus is no longer on just planning and zoning. It's about producing. It's about delivering. And I think that's going to affect Marin County like the other 57 counties in California. I hope it does. Yes, sir.
So 8 out of these 10 elements have to do with either the expansion of government or the limiting of private property rights. And so my concern here is, wouldn't it have been more feasible to go the opposite direction and towards deregulation, when if you talk to most of the local developers, and I mean local investors, people who have 2 or 3 properties, they're complaining about how much government there is as it stands. I mean, element number 10 created an entirely new agency, so I find that quite concerning.
Well, I guess the way I would try to answer that question is, you're probably going to search in vain for any idea in this list of 10 that's pure in its essence, right? I mean, all of them represent compromises. And while some of them may involve more aggressive government action, others involve the government stepping back. The whole agenda that you saw in there on the 6th idea about trying to reduce the amount of time it takes, try to reduce the number of exactions on developers of housing, it seems to me that's probably along the lines of what you were discussing. And in order to get that, there had to be some give and take in the other direction on some of the other ideas. That's what a compromise is. One more, Daryl? One more right here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I'm wondering if the CASA group looked at innovation in technical advances in materials and construction methods as a means of getting cost reduction.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea, and this plant out on Mare Island is our local prototype for that. I would also, I think there was an earlier question to Bill about, well, geez, do we have the construction workforce to even build 3.5 million houses? And the answer is no, we don't. And so a big part of a couple of these different ideas from CASA are about trying to build that workforce with apprenticeship and other kinds of programs so that we can ramp up construction. Whether we can get to 3.5 million, I don't know. But if we want to do more than we're doing now, we're going to need more workforce. Because right now, we've got a finite sum, and these fires up in Napa and Sonoma, I mean, they've sucked a lot of the construction workforce into that area, which, God bless them, I mean, they're replacing everybody's home up there, but they're taking them away from job sites elsewhere in the region. I'm told I have one more right there.
You mentioned a little bit jobs, what we see here right now. I think one of the challenges we have here in this county is it is a commuter county. And, this goes to climate change, and I would like to see more discussion about getting job hubs here in Solano County. I mean, Vallejo used to be one when the Navy was here, and so I think that's hugely important. It's not really discussed here so much, so I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. And I will say that I think you will see quite a bit of consideration and conversation about jobs and location of jobs in our next regional plan. I think we have been so focused on housing because clearly the region is in a crisis and we don't have nearly enough of it, but we've also got a case of the jobs. Look, our regional economy is booming. But it's not booming all in the right places. And I think we need to figure out and put our thinking caps on what sort of policy tools are available to us or could we go get that would allow local government and our regional institutions to be more active and more successful in citing jobs where we already have the housing inventory. Again, thanks very much for the time. One more? Yes, sir. Oh, yeah.
Well, first of all, congratulations, short-timer.
Retiree, yeah.
Congratulations, short-timer. I would like to talk about the minimal zoning near transit. Our schools have our middle school children walking 1 to 1.5 miles to school. And you got 1/4 mile down here, and some of our geographical structures in our cities, like railroad tracks and stuff, would put us in some developments just outside the 1/4 mile area, and I'd hate to lose any kind of money just because something is maybe 3/8 of a mile out or half. But you got buses for a half, why not do rail transit at the same level of a 1/2 mile?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think that sometimes, rules are made to be broken. And look, we all walk at different speeds too. So that what might be a quick walk for somebody at a 1/4 mile for somebody else might be 45 minutes. So I think we need to be smart about that and be sensible. The basic idea, though, is you want folks who are walking distance, biking distance from transit, because all of the research we've seen and all the projects we've built in the Bay Area, we know it now. Those folks are much more likely to ride the train or the ferry if they're living nearby than if they're not. Thank you.
Next up, we have the Mayor of Dixon, Tom Bogue. Questions 7, 8, 9.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, we're going to move on now to question number 7, which is, according to Solano County EDC, approximately how many residents commute outside of Solano County for work? We're going to count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
No, that one for slice.
Okay.
Next to Steve.
And the answer is C.
Not good at charades at all. No, we're not.
Question number 8.
That's the laser.
How many housing units did Solano County produce from 2015 to 17? 5. Oh, no, you don't get time for that, Monica. Okay. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And yes, the answer is B. And lastly, of the 1,200 housing units produced in Solano County between 2015 and 17, how many would qualify under the regional HIP proposal? I don't know what that is. Okay. Okay, counting down. 5, 4, 3.
The HIP is the Housing Incentive Pool Program that the MTC produced this year.
Yeah, I knew what that was. I'm glad staff did too. Okay, so how many would qualify under the regional housing incentive pool proposal?
The answer is D.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is D.
So,
Yeah.
no. So, let me just kind of clarify. You remember one of the questions at the beginning was, our average price of medium home price is somewhere in the 300,000. Now, there's homes higher than that and homes less than that, but we're still in that 300, 400,000. Marin's around $1 million, San Francisco's around 800,000. So a lot of the formulas and methodologies are based on the region, not necessarily us, which is why the question that former Supervisor Crum asked is, how do we work together? Nine Bay Area counties, 4 North Bay counties, 7 cities. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to a group that's working locally on some ideas, because I said at the beginning, we're going to hear from the state, the region. Now I want you to hear a little bit about what we are doing, because this is kind of that thought-provoking, because this is still a conversation we have to work on. So this evening we have the good fortune of recognizing and greeting several people. Our moderator this evening is Sean Quinn. Many of you may remember him. He's a former EDC director. He's the former city manager. And currently he's working with Solano EDC and STA on some of these, as a consultant on some of these projects. He's going to be our moderator this evening. And sitting next to him, we have the city manager, one of our panelists, David White. He's been the city manager since 2014. He's been, prior to that, with the city since 2004. He was a senior project manager. He worked as both the assistant city manager and the director of finance. And prior to that, he worked in real estate and urban economics and worked with advised developers and public sector clients on fiscal and financial impacts of development. Sitting next to him is Jeremy Craig. He is currently your city manager for the city of Vacaville. And Jeremy has been involved with local government for several decades. His roles have included the finance, being the director of finance, director of administration, the assistant city manager. And prior to local government, Jeremy worked for KPMG, auditing and consulting at all levels in local government, all levels of government, I should say. And the last individual sitting down there on the table, you may not recognize. He is not as familiar, but I'd like to welcome him. That's Tim McNamara. He is currently the Planning Services Director for the City of Suisun, and he recently joined Suisun, but has worked for 30 years in the private sector in consulting, working on assisting family-owned businesses in all facets of development process, including planning, analyzing projects, and programs for long-range growth. So I'd like for you to welcome the committee, the panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Is this microphone on? Can everybody hear me? Okay. Again, I'm Sean Quinn, and I'm going to be the moderator of this panel. I'm very excited to have the three people next to me to talk about housing opportunities in their communities, and they're also going to talk about some of the obstacles and constraints that they're facing in terms of producing that housing. It's clear from everybody you've heard from already about the housing crisis in the Bay Area, and the housing crisis in the Bay Area translates into a housing crisis in Solano County because we're the most affordable area of the Bay Area. I want to just go through a couple slides to show that. The first slide shows it's called the Housing Affordability Index, and it shows that the number of people, the percentage of households that could purchase a median price house by county in the Bay Area. And the highest percentage is 38% in Solano County. The national average is 53%. So even though we're affordable by Bay Area standards, compared to the national average, we're not that affordable. The second slide shows the percent of homes sold that are affordable to a family with that area's median income. What's interesting about this slide is why Solano County is still affordable. It shows that in the last 3 years of this chart, that we've gone from a percentage of 48.3% of people who could buy houses down to 29.3% over 3 years. Why is that happening? Despite the fact that the slide that Steve showed that we had 5 jobs for every house we produced over a certain period of time, we still have a lot of people moving into Solano County and commuting out of the county. The most recent data shows that in 2015 that almost 120,000 people a day leave Solano County for jobs elsewhere. Think about that. That's more people than live in the city of Fairfield. Leave the county every day for housing. It's clear that the housing markets in the Bay Area are regional. They ignore county lines, and I think that's a really important point. So when you're looking at housing programs to focus on counties lines and focus on counties by county, I think it really misses the point, and it really needs to be looked at on a regional basis. This last slide shows that Solano County is still the most affordable area in the Bay Area, but it's a challenge, as we all know. Recently, just the last questions you heard about the HIP program, and everybody said, what's the HIP program? Well, the HIP program is the Housing Incentive Pool Program that was put together by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and they developed criteria for funding, and this is money that basically has to be used for transportation and transit-related services, but is tied to housing produced by county. The program, as established, 90% of the money would have gone to 3 counties, San Francisco, Alameda, and Santa Clara. And as you saw in Solano County, we had 1 housing unit that would have qualified. And the housing unit was in the city of Benicia. But no other cities had a housing unit that would qualify under that program. So MTC, working with their board and commissioners, went back and looked at the criteria, and they've developed a $5 million set-aside called the Suburban Housing Incentive Pool Program. And the MTC staff is in the process of developing criteria for that program. The Solano Transportation Authority thought they jumped the gun and developed their own criteria and suggest that to MTC staff. And in your package, you have the STA's proposed criteria for that program. And I think what's interesting about it is that there's two key points that program focuses on. One is you have to tie the housing that's being produced to transit. If you have 120,000 people commuting out of this county every day for jobs, they're getting on the freeways. We need to encourage them to get on the ferries, on the trains, on the buses, to get them off the freeway. And then the second part of this STA guidelines they put together is really focusing on the regional aspect of housing. What's affordable in Solano County, or what's median income in Solano County, is affordable housing in most of the other counties. And so you need to look at these things on a regional basis. Also, that this money would be tied to housing produced in the priority development areas in the cities. And so we have three panelists here who are going to talk about their cities and the priority development areas and some housing that actually would qualify under the guidelines that the SDA has put forth. So first will be David White from the city of Fairfield.
Good evening, everybody. So I'll talk a little bit about the Fairfield story, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel because I would suggest, and I'll maybe be a little bit contrarian, but I hope this will all come together as I go through my PowerPoint, is that I would suggest we don't have a housing crisis in Fairfield, and I'll speak just for Fairfield. And I say that because as you listen to our story, you will see that our city council has demonstrated tremendous leadership in approving a significant amount of housing in our community. And that the reasons that that housing hasn't been produced at the level that perhaps folks expect at the state level, at the regional level, has to do with a lot of exogenous factors that I hope to unpack for you as we go through this presentation tonight. So let me just start off with a little bit about Fairfield. Of course, I'm a city manager, so I'm going to be a little bit braggadocious about our community. I think that Fairfield is absolutely a wonderful community and a very special place. We're over 100 years old and we're about 40 square miles. We're a community that has experienced tremendous growth. So over the past 50 years, we've gone from a community of about 44,000 residents to what we are today of about 116,000 residents. So as you can see, we've been very supportive of strong growth in our community. Over time, as we mature and continue to develop, we expect to be the county's largest city and expect to exceed 130,000 residents over the next 15 to 20 years. We also have wonderful employment. So we're home, most everyone should know. If you don't know, we are home to Jelly Belly, but we're also home to Travis Air Force Base, which is the county's largest employer. And that will play a role in this presentation this evening as well. As you've already heard, and again, we're very proud of it, we are one of the most diverse cities in the entire Bay Area. We rank number 4 behind Suisun and Vallejo, but we're very proud of our diversity in terms of what it brings as a proposition value. So this is a chart that I prepared. It's intentionally noisy, but I did want to get across a couple of points. So the blue line, which is the line I wanted to comment on, represents single-family home production in the city of Fairfield since 1979. And the red line demonstrates what the average development has been, and it's been about 430 units if you go back all the way to 1979. But since the Great Recession, we haven't produced at that average number. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. Again, when you understand our community, we have about 8,000 units of housing approved and in the pipeline. We are more than happy as a community to see those come to life. They've got environmental approvals in place. They have city council approvals in place. They just need to go through the entitlement process with their subdivision maps. So why haven't we produced the housing that we've approved? I think there's a number of reasons for that. Lending standards tightened since the Great Recession. That had a great factor. The cost of construction. We don't talk enough about the state regulations and how they impact us. While I don't want to get into big debates about climate change and whatnot, when you require solar panels and you require fire sprinklers in homes, that does add to the cost of development, which is something that developers need a return on. Labor is an issue. We talked a little bit about that this evening. So there's not enough labor at prices that can support development. And so because of that, the cost of construction is higher than it has been in the past. Another component that we've touched on throughout this evening is affordability. So one of the points that is unique to Solano County, and which Fairfield is definitely a player in this as well, is the recovery has been slow. And the recovery has been extremely slow in Solano County and Fairfield. And so you see that in terms of our home prices. Relative to other Bay Area cities and relative to other Bay Area counties, we have to understand and acknowledge that we have not achieved the same kind of housing performance that has occurred throughout the Bay Area. And that is important when you look at particularly with the cost of development. So our home prices, since they haven't increased at the same rate as the inner Bay Area, aren't going to get the same level of production because the cost of construction is so high. So what I want to talk a little bit about is a couple of development opportunities that exist within the city of Fairfield. We have 2 priority development areas. And that's really important because I think that there is a misnomer that when you think of Solano County, when you think of Fairfield, you might think of single-family homes. Well, our city council, our community has embraced a whole host of development opportunities that might be a little bit different than what you're used to think of. The first one is our Heart of Fairfield specific plan area. So this consumes our downtown area, and I want to tell you why I think this is a wonderful development opportunity, not only for Fairfield, but for Solano County. When you look at our Heart of Fairfield area, it consists of a tremendous amount of civic amenities. We have a 43-acre community park, we have a library, we have 2 transportation nodes. So we have proximity to our regional transit facility that gets you to Sacramento and the entire Bay Area. You also have proximity to the Suisun City Train Depot that gets you through another mode of transportation through the entire Bay Area. You have 2 employment centers. You have our City Hall, and you also have the Solano County Government Center. In addition to that, you also have some tremendous commercial opportunities and retail destinations as well. Within probably about 1 mile to 1.5 miles of this Heart of Fairfield area is our Solano Town Center. So this is a fabulous place to see development. Our city council has taken a hard look at some of the public lands that we own, and 2 development areas that I want to profile for you are development lands that are owned by the city of Fairfield and or the former redevelopment agency. And what our city council has done is taken a look at the development potential on those sites and has given us authorization from the staff level to really push the envelope and try to achieve development that is not what you might typically see in this area. So the first one you see here is what we call our Ray Venning property. It used to be a water treatment facility. It's about 5 acres. And what we see is the opportunities to development that consists of about 369 units, about 75 units per acre. So we know that this is a big stretch in our community, but we want to push the envelope and to see what's achievable. The development location is absolutely fantastic. Like I said, it's adjacent to a 43-acre community park. And it's also within about 1/2 mile to 3/4 mile of our regional transit facility. But what is it going to take to get there? It's going to take funding. So we know that in our market, given our home prices, given our rental rates, while they have significantly increased, and we totally acknowledge the fact that they are not necessarily affordable to individuals at the level and breadth that we want, we do understand that in order to achieve the kind of construction cost that this would be, that it's going to require some kind of subsidy. And this is an image of what we brought forward to our council that we'd like to achieve. Another parcel is one that we actually obtained through a land swap with our school district, and it's in our downtown Fairfield location. So it's really cool. We have ownership over an entire city block. It's called the Semieto property, and that's where Semieto High School used to be. And very similar to the Ray Venning property, we looked at a maximum development scenario and tried to see what was the total amount of development that we could get on this 2-acre block. We think we could fit about 5 stories, 276 units, and about 85 units per acre. But the challenge isn't going to be so much of its proximity and connections to regional transit. Its challenges are going to be its ability to be ready for development. So on the property today is foundation from the old school. We also have electrical utility lines that run through the property, and you also have a sewer line that runs through the property. So we acknowledge and understand that for development to occur, we're going to have to clear some obstacles. And again, this is where I think a broader array of funding opportunities, particularly those that are capable to assist us with pre-development opportunities, could do a great effort and great energy to help us make this development become a reality. This is just a quick chart that summarizes all the work that we have going on from a public works perspective. So we have a very broad agenda. We do acknowledge that we want to see some real positive change occur in our heart of Fairfield area. And so we have a whole host of projects in the works. So we are currently in very pre-design phases in what we call our West Texas Complete Street Project. And I'll give you a brief picture of what that looks like. When you look at our West Texas Street corridor, which is really the artery to the heart of Fairfield area, it's an older corridor. The mayor reminded me this morning, it's our old Highway 40. It's 5 lanes. And what we would love to see is a complete transformation of that into a 3-lane corridor that supports pedestrians, supports bicycling, really supports an environment more conducive to mixed-use residential development. The challenge we face is while we think this is a very competitive project, we do know that we compete in a very big ocean for funding, and we have a tough time distinguishing ourselves and really getting the attention that we deserve. And so we hope that there can be more appreciation for these kinds of projects in the suburban locations, because to the extent that we can achieve the funding for this project, we can see some great residential development in our community. This is just another example of another project we have in the works. We were successful to work with STA and achieve some funding for this. This is our regional transit facility at West Texas and Beck Avenue. And we have a great project in the works where we're going to take what is right now bus access that goes onto West Texas and Beck Avenue, not terribly friendly to bicyclists, not terribly friendly to pedestrians. And we have worked over the past few years with Caltrans and ST and others where we're going to have a dedicated bus access coming right into the bus transit facility. It will eliminate really the movements onto West Texas and Beck, and will overall support a much more pleasing gateway to our downtown and heart of Fairfield area. So this is our second PDA, and I always love to talk about being one of the few city managers probably in the entire Bay Area that's been able to usher in a new train station in their community over the past few years. So this is the Fairfield-Vacaville train station. It's located in Northeast Fairfield, and it is ground zero for some real exciting new development in our community. About 8,000 units of housing are planned just around this train station, and I'll show you a very high-level image so you can see what is planned. So this is what is considered the northeast part of Fairfield. It's adjacent to Travis Air Force Base, and it's in a quadrant that is adjacent to the city of Vacaville as well. And we've got 2 very significant master plan communities that are in the works. One is being spearheaded by Lewis Operating Company. It's called The Villages, and that's 1,800 units that are in construction and selling units today. The second one is called One Lake, and that is adjacent to the train station itself. And those units are in the very preliminary stages of being designed. Subdivision maps are being approved, and construction and preliminary grading is underway. The point I want to make is that within, again, the context of Fairfield, this is what has been approved. There are environmental approvals in place for just about 7,000 of these units, and we are not at all a constraining factor at the local level to see this development occur. It's access to capital that is desperately needed. It is the financing standards that have been issues. And again, it's not been local decisions whatsoever that are constraining housing development in our community. I wanted to point out this slide because one of the questions was asked is how could we take advantage of these local sub-HIP funds? And this is just a more refined image for you of the train station itself. And one of the things that I want to reiterate is the value of this train station and a value of some really strategic improvements to what is really the county's largest employer, Travis Air Force Base. So Travis Air Force Base consists of about 13,000 to 14,000 employees, and they house on base about 25% of their workforce. So 75% of their workforce lives in Solano County and the surrounding area. So one of the things that we would love to see come to fruition is some stronger pedestrian, bicycle linkages from the actual train station itself to Travis Air Force Base, because we know in speaking directly with them that their workforce would greatly benefit from those linkages and would probably be big consumers of the train station itself. In addition, we see them as a big audience for some of the new housing that's being developed in the area because of its proximity and adjacency. So just to quickly summarize for you some of the opportunities and some of the constraints, I think I touched on all of these in my presentation, but the opportunities, just to be really clear for us, are we have a very robust mix of residential development in our community. Single-family townhomes, stack flats have been approved. They've gone through decision-maker support. They've gone through robust public engagement. So we think that we're really unique in that regard in terms of having to bring that to the forefront. Some of the constraints, as I've talked about, the market's been slow to recover, and that's a factor that impacts many of the cities in Solano County. The funds for public improvements aren't as robust as they used to be with the loss of redevelopment. Cities such as Fairfield took that particularly hard at the chin, and we are eager to find new sources of capital. In terms of looking for ways to support us and to support development, I want to broaden the discussion a little bit to talk about pre-development capital that could be very instrumental to many of us in Solano County. And then just acknowledge that the competition for limited funds exists. And we find in our experience is that there tends to be a bias towards the Inner Bay area as opposed to looking more broadly at Solano, Napa, and Sonoma counties, where we believe we have some wonderfully competitive projects. So those will conclude for me this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Jeremy Craig again with City of Vacaville. In deference to you, with those of you in the crowd that have 2-hour parking, I will try to make this very brief. I know we're running a little late. But similar to Fairfield, Vacaville has a great story to tell. For those who don't know, the city has approved nearly 3,000 housing units that are fully approved, entitled, ready to be developed. To give you an example, last year we built 169 residential housing units. So it's not a local constraint. Those housing units are approved and ready to be developed. Market conditions, limitation of labor force, costs have all driven those issues. So we are ready in those things. But this evening I want to take a moment to tell a story of our 2 prior development areas. We have 2 great stories to tell. So just quickly, we have 2, Allison Ulatis PDA and our downtown Vacaville PDA. Both were established in 2008. Staff has done a variety of things to help move these forward, but what makes these 2 unique is they offer such a round level of service to the people that live in these areas. From transit to housing, goods and services, employment, entertainment options. We'll talk about all those as we walk through them. So just to orient you, for the Allison Ulatis PDA, it borders I-80 and Allison Drive all the way to Ulatis Creek. You see it highlighted there. A little better picture for you. Currently already housing inside of this development area. What's key to this area, you see right in the middle is a nice big purple blob. That is our transportation center. So it provides access to the entire region. As you can see, it's kind of in the heart of everything, from restaurants to retail to employment centers such as Travis Credit Union. Also, what's unique to this region, you notice the big mustard blob at the bottom, that is our Arts and Cultural Center. There's a county library, a community center, Performing Arts Theater, are all located within walking distance of the transit center. So what are we doing? If you notice that the last picture, there were some pieces missing. Currently, we have 1, 2, 3 projects in development at various stages. So all of these will have various aspects, really working to play off that location close to the transit center, take advantage of the strengths that the region already has. Again, transit center is in the heart of that empty property. If you notice, it's surrounded by these 3 projects. Our limitations are really come down to infrastructure. It's getting people to and from the transit center, to and from these residential areas. It's intersections, it's walkways, pedestrian paths. One of the council's big goals is we'd love to find a way to take our downtown transit center and this regional transit center and connect them via pedestrian and bike path, so you wouldn't have to cross the highway. You could actually have a path to and from to link our 2 main transportation areas. Those are project dollars that currently don't exist, but would be great in kind of putting this whole region together. Just to give you an aspect of Allison Ulatis PDA, currently 3,500 jobs located inside of this prior development area. Anticipate that will grow to about 4,300 by 2035. Travis Credit Union, Chase Bank, Bank of America. There's a Safeway, a Target, Ross, Burlington. There's over 15 restaurants. So truly, if you lived in one of these new developments, you could park your car and leave it, or perhaps not even have a car. With the regional transit center, walking distance to major retail and grocery, everything is located in this small area. Give you an idea of the vision of this PDA area. Currently already have 600 units of high density housing inside of the PDA. We're hoping to almost double that over the next 10 years with these variety of projects. This will give you a sense of one of the projects that is proposed. Apologize, it's a little hard to see on the screen there. Proposal underway is 245 unit, will be a mix from studio to 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, fully amenitized, directly across, would actually share a walkway and an intersection with the transit center on two sides. So the ability to make this happen would add a lot of density on top of transit, next to the highway, provides a great deal of what we need in terms of multifamily. Our vacancy rate is extremely low in Vacaville right now. It's difficult to find apartment sites or find apartments for rent, so this would provide it. Unfortunately, given the current cost conditions, this project doesn't pencil with all the infrastructure costs required. The two intersections, the frontage, the actual walkways, the transit paths for bicycle and pedestrian make this project not pencil in the current high-cost environment. Again, just briefly mention what we really think is unique about this is the fact that not only do you have access to shopping, but you have a huge cultural component to this area. You can walk over to the library, you can visit the Performing Arts Theater for concerts or plays that happen pretty much on a weekly basis. So it's a unique opportunity that you could truly live, work, and play in this area, never use a car if you didn't need to. Our downtown prior development area, this is the heart of our downtown area. This is bordered again by Interstate 80 all the way up to Monte Vista and Depot Street. So what you'll see in this area, it's a pretty far use of different uses. We have housing, we have retail, we have a park in the center of the development, and we also have a transit center. A senior center is located here. There's actually a grocery, pharmacy, all located on the outskirts of the PDA. So a lot of the service areas are here. The future vision for the area, the project slides you see here are already approved. This is the East Main District. The city spent 12 years assembling 22 individual parcels to make the East Main project happen. They approved it in October of last year. If it ever stops raining, we hope to see progress on it soon. But this project will include 83 mixed residential units and 11,000 square feet of retail in the heart of downtown, all within walking distance of the transit center. We recently just started, in fact, council just approved a specific plan for our downtown, which is getting underway, as well as a walkway and a transit plan for the way to access our downtown. These are some just preliminary visions. We were fortunate to have some UC Davis students come and attend, spend the summer with us and draw up some preliminary plans for what they envisioned the downtown to be from a pedestrian standpoint. This was one concept that would produce an art walk and a farmer's market stand that essentially could be parked during the day, pulled out during the night, and replaced with farmer stands, which would create a marketplace along our Depot Street, which for those of you who know the area, Depot Street was the historic area where the train tracks actually backed up and they would load fresh fruit to take back east in the early 1900s. We look at the area as a whole, we did want to highlight one spot that we think is very unique. At the very top of our PDA, we have a site that is ready for redevelopment. It's what we refer to as the old CVS site. It's now an abandoned property. It's 4.5 acres directly across from our transit center. It's a 5-minute walk to basically anything. There's a high school, grocery store, pharmacy, all our downtown restaurant shops, our theater, everything is located within there. It's currently just vacant property. So we would love to see a mixed-use development in that site. Just to give you a hint of what that looks like. It's the purple blob, the mixed use there. Give you an idea relative to where the transit center is in our new East Main District. You can see Andrews Park right there in the center of the development. So real opportunity to build some quality housing and some retail needs. Our needs in the downtown PDA are not unlike most downtowns. The city dates back to 1850. This is our original downtown. So we have sewer improvement needs, water improvement needs, transit to make it more accessible, more walkable. I mean, the vision is to make this a pedestrian-friendly, or even more pedestrian-friendly than it is, be able to access it from the nearby neighborhoods. So all of that would be required to make this truly come to life. So those are the kind of the infrastructure needs we have in the downtown. We think that both of these projects, both Allison and the downtown, could lead to some high-quality development that would provide a lot more housing at that level that we currently need it, which is that multifamily, condominium, small unit, transit-oriented housing. One of the sites in Allison is actually city-owned at this point, so we'll be looking at bringing a transit-oriented development process through the council, hopefully RFP that out in the coming months. So our goal is to create that. The goal we're missing right now is the cost structure just does not work. Even given our current apartment rates, the numbers just aren't penciling given the high cost of construction to make this work. So without some sort of subsidy, a lot of these projects are not going to move forward until we find some alternative financing for them. The numbers don't work even with market rate, much less trying to put any affordable units on top of it. So some real challenges, but some real exciting opportunities too. I think these are quality developments that could really serve the area well.
Good evening. Everybody still hanging in there? All right, we got one more to go. Welcome to Suisun. We're the host city tonight. Appreciate everybody being here. How great it is to be talking about housing. Great speakers. Bill, thank you. Steve, thank you. Suisun, wonderful city. It's not a formatting issue in the upper right-hand corner there. I purposely didn't fill in the part of Suisun. I've lived in the Bay Area for quite a number of years, and I think one of the common misperceptions about Suisun is that a lot of developers and people don't know that Suisun is here. They don't know that Suisun has this gorgeous fireworks display where some 25,000 people show up on July 4th and celebrate our wonderful heritage. They don't know that we have a 150-slip marina sitting right here on our waterfront. It's gorgeous. When people do get to the city, when developers do get here, they realize, wow, where's this place been? So what we hope to do in Suisun is actually start completing, filling in that sign. And, oh, somebody changed it on the upper right. So Suisun, let me sort of give some ahead of time some kudos to Supervisor Sparing. Suisun, not too long ago, this was it. And just sort of tongue-in-cheek, real estate for sale, yeah. Suisun, under great efforts from our city manager and also our mayor, and lots of great effort from state and redevelopments. They took a city that once looked like that, and we are now this. And that's a public-private partnership, a very successful story. It's a chapter that's written, Suisun's future, its next chapter. We take it from a depot that once was to a depot that now is, and again, through wonderful public-private partnerships, we're able to take old to create new, yet create and save the heritage. You can see a lot of familiar faces in that image there. A lot of great efforts to SDA and others. The efforts, as we're discussing tonight, the chapter that Suisun writes, is really centered around our PDA. And just to give you an idea where that PDA lies, Suisun obviously is a very large city, but as we talk about our PDA, we're talking about an infill site in our central downtown. So it's an extraordinary opportunity to sort of match up what we're all talking about in terms of housing to one of an extraordinary location. The PDA are those lines, those circles. I'm going to give you just a quick, what are those? As we think about wonderful cities, we've all been to wonderful cities around the country. We can all think of those cities. We all have them in our mind. What are those cities that we all remember? They're cities that they're safe, they're walkable, there's something about them that's pleasant, the architecture's great. It's a whole number of things that need to come together to make a place better, a place where people actually want to live as opposed to having to live. So in Suisun, our efforts going forward are to try to make Suisun a place where people want to live. That's a big difference between wanting and having. The quarter-mile ring and the half-mile ring are very significant when you talk about transit and you talk about a safe environment where people want to walk. So the quarter-mile walk or the half-mile walk, where that ring is drawn from, is actually dead center on our depot. Now, the depot obviously is something that a lot of cities would love to have, and the cities, it's a great asset. Why is it a great asset? Because it's a place where people come and go. It's the center of most big cities. It's the center of activity. It's the place where people walk to and they walk from. Let me just go back a slide. I also forgot to mention that we have an extraordinary main street. So a main street that has about 2,200 feet in length, That's an envy of most city planners, because when you have block after block after block of potential retail, that's an extraordinary opportunity. It's a place where people actually want to visit. If it's done right, you can get them to actually stay. The opportunity sites, or the sites within that quarter mile, half mile ring, are pretty much all of the PDA. I can tell you that we have eyes on most of the PDA from a development standpoint. But just to give you an idea, within that quarter, half mile ring, just to orient your eyes, north of Highway 12 to the far left of the screen, there's a 34-acre site that's completely vacant. Just as you approach Highway 12, there's a private site with 2.5 acres. Now, I'll hopefully have a chance to touch upon private lands versus public lands. Just across the street from our train station, the train station is, that's a Caltrans property. So I think, Steve, you had mentioned, or maybe Bill mentioned, a lot of sites in California are actually publicly owned sites. That's a great opportunity site. The highlighted area, and a lot of that yellow, is an area within, again, that sweet spot of that quarter mile of our train station. There's an awful lot of opportunity there. As a city, we need to start visioning what are we going to do there. Now, there's a lot of Main Street there, but there's also a railroad corridor. So confined within that space, there's opportunity. And as we kind of wind our way around the waterfront, I can tell you that just outside that half mile ring, we've got eyes and development opportunities already happening with dense housing and medium dense housing along the waterfront. Now, these are sites that have been exposed to developers recently. One of the constraints, obviously, in Suisun is water, and being in a water environment. The soils are not exactly stable, so the cost of development is very expensive, particularly if you go above 3 stories. That means you may have to do something in terms of enhancing soil, pile driving, et cetera. So as we add those layers of cost, you start to scare away development. So that's obviously a lot of what we're talking about today is density, but if density is done right, and if we do it with a little bit of help, the kind of density that the state is after could absolutely happen. Again, we also need the vision of our city. That means sort of resetting the button with our council going forward, which our mayor is doing in an extraordinary positive way moving forward, and also with a lot of transparency. So as you start envisioning density, it scares a lot of people. What does that mean for a small city like ours? So you don't want to just sort of take that leap without talking and bring it to the community. But if it's done right, it can be a beautiful place. The economics behind walkable, beautiful neighborhoods are, I think most cities should recognize. Now, these are not my studies. These are obviously studies that have been by professionals, done by professionals, dealing with what's in it for a city. So not only having the density, but if density is done right, the people buy more things, people want to live there, people will transit, which means there's a quality of life issue. So if you attract the people to live there with the right kind of housing, with the right amenities, the benefits are both for the city and for the people that live within your city. The kinds of things that are happening in Suisun right now that might be that catalyst, in addition to the state talking about housing, is the public-private partnership that we're in discussions now with STA on parking, and also having STA building their office on our Main Street. 2 important events that are happening this year, and these events have engaged our city. So we're talking about parking, and realize that cities really can't function properly if they don't address parking. So one of the constraints, obviously, in our city is the disjointed nature of parking. So if we can come together with centralizing parking with potentially a partnership with STA and a good partnership with STA, a lot of the problem could be solved. That, again, attracts the great housing in our downtown. Some of the principles of TOD, T is the transit, we have it. The OD is transit-oriented development. These are principles that good, wholesome quality of life cities that have done it swear by. So again, we can learn, as Steve has mentioned. We can learn from others. It's been happening all over the Bay Area. These common principles are something that we as a city are now addressing. I don't have a lot of time to go into any of these here, but I'm happy to provide the slides to anybody in the next go-around. And with that, I will say good night and thank you all for coming to Suisun.
So I want to thank Tim and Jeremy and David for their presentation. Obviously, you saw a lot of opportunities here for housing and links to transit that they talked about, but you also heard of some of the constraints, and we're going to continue to work on those. But given the hour, we're running behind. I think we're going to turn it over to questions right now. A couple questions? You want us to wrap up? Wrap up. Okay. Just go to the wrap up.
So, I don't want to be rude. Is there anyone that still has a question? I know we're past our commitment. We tried to start on time. We're running long. I've got one question. I want to at least be fair.
Thank you. So that was terrific. So I just kind of wanted to wrap where we started with public comments earlier. Heard from two of the orderly growth members about what we've done in Solano County. So we have thank you. We have 3 cities in Solano County with urban growth boundaries that were promoted by the Orderly Growth Committee, 2 of which are up here tonight, Vacaville and Fairfield, and Benicia is the 3rd one. So in terms of producing housing, has an urban growth boundary caused any problems for you guys in terms of getting housing going in your cities?
I can speak for Vacaville. Given our current situation, it hasn't created a restriction. We still have plenty of available property. The general plan we adopted in 2015 has a real focus towards infill development. I can tell you infill development is very hard. It takes a lot of community engagement and can be very costly, but there is a focus towards that. So it takes a little longer to do, but it is worthwhile, and we are starting to see that to happen.
Okay. So I want to thank the 4 of you for being the wrap-up at the end of the evening. And I do want to thank our other 2 speakers, and Daryl, my partner. You might be thinking, okay, now what's next? So we promised you'd hear from 3 levels of government. You also heard the CASA Compact is a set of concepts that's now a set of legislative concepts. So our work isn't done. We're not the same as the other 9 Bay Area counties. In fact, every one of the 9 Bay Area counties is different, and we have our own set of constraints, our own set of opportunities, our own set of possibilities, and you're going to need to help with that process. You're going to need to help engage in that conversation. You're going to need to help come up with, what does Solano do? What do our 7 cities do? And how do we grow up? Where do our children, our grandchildren, and our parents live as we move forward? That's that planning process that all of us are going to wind up starting anew. Sean and I worked on this 15 years ago, and it's back. So, I want to make sure that the next generation of people, and those of you who helped us before, that you get engaged and help us. So what does that mean? Well, track what we're doing at the City County Coordinating Council, because this conversation is going to continue. We'll probably do something in the fall as another kind of a summit, maybe another angle of housing and another conversation about where are we and how are things going. But make sure you get engaged in the census, not only in the planning process that's taking place in 19, but in 2020 when we actually have to execute that census, because that's going to be imperative for us to document who's here, who's living here, what do they need, and what have we done in terms of all the pieces that get measured and counted in that process. And certainly participate in the regional housing needs process as we go forward. I said at the beginning, that process is starting this year. That conversation is starting now to plan for what we have to put in our documents in 2022. It's a long lead time, and it sounds because by design it's a long lead time. It gets started at ABAG and MTC, and then it trickles down to us. Actually, it starts at the state. So there's more to come. This is just the beginning. This is an opportunity for you to get engaged and help us as we shape where we're going for the next 15, 20 years. So with that, let's see if Daryl has any other comments at this
I
point.
just have two things to remember. One, if you were a city in Solano County, SB2 has housing production planning funds available now, this year. No excuse. Everybody gets a share of the funds. Take advantage of it. Talk to your planning staff. Our staff is tracking it. So get those planning funds. I want to thank Steve and Bill for being here, taking the drive all the way down here. Also, Steve helped get us a public meeting on Plan Bay Area in Vallejo, March 20th. So the City of Vallejo will be hosting. It's in the evening, so we'll get information out. It's to talk about your priorities for Plan Bay Area, which is obviously very critical to Solano County. So make sure that you show up. And with that, thank you very much for being here and joining us. If you're taking a bus, thank you. Bus leaves in 5 minutes, so grab your local.